Okay, welcome to lesson number 6, and in this chapter 8 is the subject matter of lesson 6. We'll be covering flexible budgets, costs, standard costs, and variance analysis. Before we get into the material on the chapter, I want to point out in the homework that after reading the chapter, there are 2 discussion questions. The first consists of exercises 8, 9, 10, 11, 14, 17, 19, and 22. I'd like you to pay particular attention to 14 and 17. They are discussed specifically in the chapter, and we'll point that out as we come across it. The second discussion question, the analytical thinking, appears in the text at the page 369 and just a little tiny bit of 370. I'm sorry, let's scratch that. 379 and 380, the analysis questions. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I believe. Yes, 7 questions to answer in regard to the analysis. This one's not a lot of lengthy computation, but it does require a bit of reflection and thinking. Okay, so those are the exercises to be turned in at the conclusion of the week, and then we take up chapters 7 and 8, the last bit of summer school, and we'll be done. Progress looks good, and let's take a look now at the material in lesson 6, chapter 8. Flexible budget. A standard budget, we've studied already, is an excellent tool for planning, but it is a very poor tool for analysis. That's the basic subject of the chapter. If you want to analyze performance, the static budget has already a set level of activity, which probably is not what actually took place. So we prepare flexible budgets by first considering changes in the level of activity. This would be sales calls, revenues generated in particular, but any activity that was greater or less than anticipated in the static budget. We then use those levels of activity to determine what would the costs have been budgeted if that had been our planned level of activity rather than the actual. And now we come across changes in revenue. We call them variances. They can be favorable, more revenue than expected, or unfavorable, less than expected. And changes in spending, costs and expenditures. That would be favorable, less than expected, or unfavorable, more than expected. Once we have taken a look at those variances, we focus on the largest ones first. This is a process called management by exception. Since a manager has limited time and attention span, the best use of management talent is to look at those things which are going to make the biggest difference when corrected, or when analyzed, or when changed. So we focus on the larger variances first, and we ignore the smaller ones until we have such time as we can analyze them too. And usually we never really get to it because the work marches on. So management by exception is an especially effective use of management skill by taking a look at those larger variances. Once we analyze, we can then judge the performance. And again, with performance judgments, we want to be sure that we are analyzing those factors which the managers and directors being evaluated actually have control. Sometimes the events are not in their control, and therefore those variances should not be used to judge performance. Okay, that's something we already discussed in the previous chapter, but worth going into once again. So the first several pages, and I would start with page 337. Had a little trouble with the glasses here. We're going to get new ones in about 10 days, and we should be able to read a little better close up. So 337 and on, read about the characteristics of flexible budgets, and then go back to the first page of the book, 336, or the first page of the chapter, and read the material on the variance analysis cycle. The cycle will make sense after you've read what the budgeting for variances process looks like. Then you'll make more sense of the diagram at the bottom of that page. Otherwise, it's something that you're liable to look at and forget, and it is crucial to the understanding of the chapter. I would say certainly central to the overall concept. Make sure you give adequate time to the concept checks. Guidance answers are given on page 359 to those concept checks. And so in summary, we want to first of all learn how one prepares the flexible budget, and then we want to prepare reports showing revenue and spending variances. It's possible also, as the text points out, to generate a flexible budget using multiple cost drivers, more than one cost driver, and we mentioned that very briefly. It's not a terribly important section, but you'll come across it. Compute the direct materials quantity and price variances, and the next step, of course, in the analysis portion of the flowchart is to explain why did this happen. And after we explain why, then what action needs to be taken, or can we ignore it? And then take the action and begin the process of analysis over again. We also want to compute labor efficiency rates and variances and explain their significance. And we want to compute and measure the variances in manufacturing overhead efficiency and rate experiences. And that will pretty much take you through the chapter. The key thing here is to not get bogged down in the details, but briefly read over the chapter and then turn right away to the exercises and problems. Again, I want to emphasize problems number 11 and 14 as being of specific interest to us. All right, carry on, and next week we'll take up lesson 9, I believe. Let's take a look ahead just a little bit. Lesson 7 rather. In lesson 7 we'll take up chapter 9, which deals with standard costs. We'll talk about that at the time. So continue to do the good work and give this adequate time to settle in before you take the quiz. We'll see you later.